She drained every account we had, said, "You were never enough," and slammed the door. 1 hour later, she was sobbing on the phone, begging me to fix what her new man had just broken beyond repair. My name is Gerald Stokes. People call me Jerry. I'm 52 years old. I built 2 businesses from the ground up. I coached Little League for 9 years. And until last Tuesday afternoon, I thought I was still married. Gloria had been acting restless for weeks. Quieter at dinner, checking her phone under the table, going to bed early, and then still being awake when I came up an hour later. I'd noticed. I just hadn't named it yet. That Tuesday, I came home from a site visit at our Clarksburg facility around 4 in the afternoon. Her car was in the driveway, which wasn't unusual. But when I walked through the front door, 2 large suitcases were standing in the hallway. Not tucked away, not half-packed. Standing there like they'd been waiting for me to see them. Gloria walked out of the kitchen, holding her purse. She was dressed like she was going somewhere nice, the kind of put-together she used to be for our anniversary dinners. Blouse pressed, earrings in, hair done. She looked at me with an expression I didn't recognize. Not anger, not guilt, something worse. Certainty. "I moved the money this morning," she said, like she was telling me the weather. All of it. I stood there in my work jacket and just stared at her. "What money?" She tilted her head slightly. "The joint accounts. Savings. The retirement fund. Your brokerage position." She adjusted the strap of her purse. "I'm not walking out of here with nothing, Jerry." The air went out of the room. I pulled out my phone, opened the banking app with hands that didn't feel like mine. The savings account gone. The retirement account we'd fed every month for 22 years. Emptied. The brokerage, liquidated. $423,000. Moved out in 3 transactions. "Gloria, don't." She cut me off without raising her voice. "I've made my decision." "Where are you going?" She picked up her purse and lifted one of the suitcase handles. "Somewhere I feel alive." She paused at the door, and I saw something flicker across her face. Not regret. More like the final line of a speech she'd been rehearsing. "Goodbye, Jerry. You were never enough. Not for the life I wanted." She pulled the door shut behind her. The sound of it wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, the house pressing in around me. 24 years of marriage. 2 kids grown and gone. A mortgage almost paid off. A neighborhood where people waved from their driveways and asked about the grandkids you didn't have yet. And now 2 suitcase-shaped marks on the hardwood floor where she'd been standing. I walked to the kitchen table and sat down. The banking app was still open on my phone. I scrolled through the transactions, timestamp between 9 and 11 that morning, while I was 3 counties away checking inventory at Clarksburg. She planned the timing down to the hour. I thought about the last year, the new clothes that showed up without shopping trips I knew about. The weekend she went to a marketing conference in Charlotte, but came back tanned. The way she looked past me at dinner like I was a piece of furniture she was deciding whether to keep. I sat there for nearly an hour, not moving, not crying, just calculating. Then my phone buzzed. Her name on the screen. Exactly 61 minutes after she walked out. I let it ring twice. Then I picked up. "Jerry." Her voice was different, thin, unsteady. The certainty from the hallway was gone. "I need to talk to you. Something's wrong with the transfer." I didn't answer right away. I let the silence sit between us like a third person in the room. "I'm listening," I finally said, and my voice came out flat and even. Because I was listening. But I also understood something in that moment that she clearly didn't. An hour ago, she'd closed a door. Now she needed me to open one. People always ask the same question after something like this. How did you not see it coming? And the honest answer is, I did see it. I just convinced myself I was wrong. About 4 months before Gloria walked out, I started noticing small things that didn't add up. A dinner reservation charged to our joint card at a restaurant I'd never been to. On a Tuesday night when she told me she was at her book club. A text notification that flashed across her phone screen while it was face up on the kitchen counter. Just a name and a partial sentence before she grabbed it. The name was Trent. I told myself it could be nothing. A co-worker. An old friend. I was good at talking myself out of suspicion. 24 years of marriage will do that to you. It builds a kind of default trust that's hard to override, even when the signs are right in front of your face. But something kept gnawing at me. And about 3 months before she left, I did something I never thought I'd do. I called a private investigator. His name was Lou Sizemore, a stocky, quiet man in his mid-50s who ran a one-man operation out of a strip mall office in Hagerstown. A buddy in my freight company had used him once during a contractor dispute. Lou didn't waste words. When I sat down across from him and laid out what I'd noticed, he just nodded slowly and said, "Give me 2 weeks." He needed 10 days. What Lou brought back changed the shape of everything. Gloria had been meeting a man named Trent Collier, 37 years old, a so-called private investment consultant who worked out of a shared office space downtown and ran something called Meridian Capital Advisors. No brick-and-mortar office. No verifiable client list. Just a slick website and a LinkedIn profile with impressive-sounding credentials. Lou had done the extra digging I'd asked for. He'd traced Collier back to Atlanta, where 3 years earlier a 51-year-old divorced woman named Patricia Garner had transferred $340,000 into a private fund Collier managed. The fund dissolved within 8 months. Garner's money was never recovered. The civil case stalled. Collier had moved on before it could catch him. But here's what made my blood run cold. Collier wasn't working alone. Lou had found a woman, Jade Moreau, 31 years old, based out of Richmond. According to Lou's research, Jade and Collier had been in a relationship for at least 2 years. She wasn't just a girlfriend. She had her own financial credentials, or at least documents that looked like credentials, and she handled the back-end processing for Collier's investment platform. The Patricia Garner scheme in Atlanta had her fingerprints all over it. She was the one who structured the receiving accounts. She was the one who made the paperwork look legitimate. And now Collier was running the same play on Gloria, with Jade Moreau waiting in the wings. I sat with that information for 3 months. 3 months of watching Gloria come and go, knowing what I knew, letting her think she had the upper hand. I'm not proud of every moment of that waiting. There were nights when I wanted to confront her right then and blow the whole thing open. But I kept coming back to the same thought. If I moved too soon, I'd lose everything. If I was patient, I might save most of it. So instead of confronting her, I called Neil Abrams. Neil is a sharp attorney who specializes in family law and asset protection. I'd met him through a closing on one of my storage properties. When I explained the situation, he didn't flinch. He told me exactly what I needed to do: restructure the business before anything moved. Over the following 6 weeks, I worked quietly with Neil to spin off both companies, the storage network and my stake in the freight operation, into a separate legal entity managed by a business trust. My longtime operations manager, Dave Purdy, was listed as the administrator. On paper, I was a salaried employee of a company I no longer technically owned outright. It wasn't hidden. It was structured, legally and correctly. When Gloria's attorney eventually came after the businesses, there would be nothing to grab. I hadn't stopped there either. About 2 months before she left, I noticed something that hit closer to home. Gloria had started talking to our son Garrett differently. Garrett worked with me at the storage company, logistics coordinator, had been with us for almost 2 years. Good at the job, learning fast. But over dinner on the nights Garrett joined us, Gloria would steer the conversation toward his future. Subtle things. Don't you want to do something with more growth potential? And Trent was saying there are real opportunities in private investment right now. Maybe Garrett should talk to him. She was trying to pull Garrett away from the company. Away from me. Whether it was to weaken the business or to give Collier another victim, I didn't know. But I'd seen it clearly enough to make sure Garrett and I had a private conversation. I didn't tell him everything. Not yet. I just told him that if anyone ever approached him about outside investment opportunities, he should come to me first. He agreed without asking too many questions. That was enough for now. Our daughter Lexi was a different story. She was 21, finishing her last year at University of Maryland, sharp as a tack and studying pre-law. She didn't know anything about Gloria and Collier, or at least I thought she didn't. I was wrong about that, but I wouldn't find out until later. The night Gloria walked out, after I hung up the phone and told her I was listening, I already had 3 months of documentation on my side, a restructured business she couldn't touch, and a private investigator still actively tracking Collier's movements. She thought she was walking into a new life. She was actually walking into a containment zone I'd been building for 90 days. I called Neil Abrams the moment I hung up with Gloria. He picked up on the second ring, which told me he'd been expecting to hear from me. I'd briefed him 2 weeks earlier that things were moving toward a breaking point. I gave him the short version. She's gone. Accounts are empty. She just called asking for help with the transfer. Don't touch anything yet, Neil said immediately. Don't log into any joint accounts. Don't send any communications to her in writing, and don't agree to anything over the phone. I'll have paperwork filed by morning. I told him about the call. The frozen funds. Her asking me to help. There was a pause. Then Neil said, let her think you're cooperating. Find out where the money went. That's more valuable than anything right now. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and pulled up everything I had on Meridian Capital Advisors, the platform Gloria had used to receive the transfers. I'd already researched it 3 weeks earlier, when Lou Sizemore first flagged Collier's operation. What I found then was enough to make me careful. What I found now, looking again with fresh eyes, was enough to make me certain. The platform had no FINRA registration, no SEC filing number. The domain had been registered 18 months ago, and the listed business address was a mailbox service in Delaware. The testimonials on the website were word-for-word identical to testimonials on 2 other investment platforms I found with a quick search, platforms that had since gone dark. This wasn't just risky. This was constructed to fail. I called Lou Sizemore. It was past 8 at night, but Lou answered like it was the middle of the workday. She moved it, I told him. I know, Lou replied. Collier's been pushing her to execute for 2 weeks. I was going to call you tomorrow. A pause. There's a wrinkle, Jerry. Tell me. Jade Morrow flew into BWI this afternoon. She's at a hotel in Silver Spring. She and Collier met there for about 2 hours this evening. I let that settle. Morrow wasn't a background figure anymore. She was on site. Whatever was happening with the funds, both of them were actively managing it. Keep watching, I said. I need to know the moment either of them moves. I drove to the apartment complex Gloria had given as her address. A mid-rise downtown with underground parking and a lobby that smelled like expensive indifference. She buzzed me up without making me wait, which told me she was scared enough to skip the performance. She opened the door in a sweater and bare feet, makeup faded, eyes carrying the kind of tired that comes from adrenaline running out. The apartment was modern and sparse, the kind of place that looks great in photos and feels hollow in person. And there was Trent Collier, standing near the kitchen island with his arms loosely crossed, watching me with the practiced ease of a man who'd done this before. He was younger looking in person, square jaw, good posture, the kind of surface confidence that works well in a first impression. He extended a hand and said, Jerry, thanks for coming. I didn't take it. Show me the documentation, I said. We sat at the dining table. Collier pulled up the platform dashboard on his laptop and walked me through it like a man giving a sales presentation. Calm, measured, full of vocabulary designed to sound more sophisticated than the underlying reality. Liquidity hold, compliance review, accelerated redeployment cycle. I listened. I asked 3 questions he couldn't fully answer. Then I turned the laptop toward me and started reading the actual terms buried in the agreement's appendix. There it was. A margin leverage clause, activated automatically upon transfer receipt, allowing the platform to extend positions using the deposited capital as collateral, up to 2.5 times the original amount. Did you explain this clause to her before she signed? I asked, keeping my voice level. Collier shifted slightly. It's standard language in growth-oriented instruments. It's a mechanism that can expose her to losses beyond what she deposited, I replied. That's not standard. That's a trap. Gloria had gone very still across the table. How much has been deployed? I pressed. Approximately 70%, Collier admitted, with the careful tone of someone giving up ground they plan to hold. I sat back. 70% of $423,000 already in motion inside a platform with no legitimate registration, managed by a man with a documented history of financial fraud and a partner who'd flown in that afternoon to help manage the exit. I looked at Gloria directly. Her hands were clasped on the table, knuckles pale. You asked me to come here and help, I said quietly. So here's my help. This platform is not what he told you it was. The money may already be partially unrecoverable. And if that leverage clause triggers, you won't just lose what you transferred. You'll own more than you started with. The color left her face. Collier started to speak. I cut him off without raising my voice. I'm not talking to you right now. Gloria looked at me the way she hadn't looked at me in years, like I was the only solid thing in the room. What do we do? She asked. First, I said, pulling out my phone, I call my attorney. Neil Abrams answered before the second ring even finished. I stepped away from the dining table into the hallway of Gloria's rented apartment, keeping my voice low and my back to the room. I laid it out fast. The margin clause, the 70% already deployed, the unregistered platform, Collier sitting 12 feet away. Neil was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Then he said, "Don't let either of them leave that apartment tonight with any additional documentation. I'm filing an emergency motion first thing tomorrow to freeze further outgoing distributions from that platform. Domestic jurisdiction only, but it's a start. And Jerry, I need everything. Transfer receipts, the agreement, screenshots of that dashboard. Already on it," I told him. I went back to the table and spent the next 40 minutes photographing every document Collier had on his laptop while he sat across from me with the strained patience of a man watching his plan develop complications he hadn't accounted for. Gloria sat beside me, not beside him. I noticed that. I don't think she did. When I finished, I looked at Collier directly. "I'm going to need originals of everything you just showed me. Printed and signed." His jaw tightened. "That's not how this process works." "It is now," I replied. He held my gaze for a moment. Then he went to print the documents. The moment he stepped in the back room, Gloria leaned toward me and said quietly, "He told me this was guaranteed, that there was no way to lose." I looked at her without flinching. Nobody who runs a legitimate operation uses the word guaranteed. That's the first thing you learn. She pressed her lips together and looked away. Collier came back with a folder of printouts. I took them, checked each page, and stood up. As I headed toward the door, Gloria followed me into the hallway. "Jerry," she touched my arm lightly. "I know I don't have any right to ask you for anything, but thank you." I looked at her for a moment. "Don't thank me yet," I said. "This is a long way from over." I drove home with the documents on the passenger seat and called Lou Sizemore from the car. "What did Moreau do after she left the hotel?" I asked. "Checked in somewhere else," Lou said. "Different hotel, different name on the booking. Cash paid at the desk." A pause. "She's not here for the scenery, Jerry. These two are in the wind-down phase of the operation. They've done this before. They know exactly how long it takes for a wire transfer to clear international channels. My guess, they got a 48 to 72-hour window before anyone can legally touch those funds." That hit me hard. 48 hours. "There's more," Lou added, and his voice shifted to something quieter. "I ran Moreau's background through some channels I have in Atlanta. She was present during the Garner situation, not just paperwork. She had a personal relationship with Patricia Garner's brother. Used that connection to build trust, get inside the family's financial picture. These two don't just target the women. They map the whole support network first." I pulled over on the side of the road. The implications of that were landing one by one. "Were they mapping mine?" I asked. "That's what I'm still working on," Lou said carefully. "But Collier asked Gloria about your businesses at least 4 times in the last 2 months, according to the recordings. He was very interested in the freight company specifically." I thought about Garrett, about the conversations Gloria had steered at dinner, about how close Collier had come to getting inside my operation through my own son. "Lou," I said, "I need you to stay on Moreau through the night. If she moves toward anything that looks like a departure, airport, rental car, anything, I want to know immediately." "Already on it," he replied. I sat in my parked truck on a dark street for a few minutes after we hung up, engine idling. The temperature had dropped, and the windows were beginning to fog at the edges. I thought about what I was dealing with. Not a midlife affair, not a reckless impulse, a calculated, coordinated financial predation. And Gloria had walked right into the center of it, carrying everything we'd built together. I wasn't angry at her in that moment. Not exactly. What I felt was something colder and more useful than anger. I pulled back onto the road and drove home. I had documents to scan, a timeline to reconstruct, and a call to make to a federal financial crimes tip line whose number Neil had given me 3 weeks ago. I hadn't planned to use it this soon, but 48 hours had a way of changing the math. Neil called me at 7 the next morning with the kind of efficiency I'd come to expect from him. The emergency motion had been filed at 6:45. A federal judge in the district had granted a temporary restraining order on further outgoing distributions from Meridian Capital Advisors' domestic accounts. It wasn't a full freeze. The platform had international tentacles Neil couldn't touch yet, but it was a wall between Collier and whatever hadn't moved yet. "How much is still reachable?" I asked. "Roughly 30% of the original transfer," Neil said. "About $127,000. The rest is in channels that are going to require federal cooperation to pursue. I've already been in contact with a financial crimes investigator at the FBI field office. They were already aware of this platform. Apparently, it had been flagged in an unrelated investigation. This just gave them a domestic nexus. That was the best news I'd heard in 2 days. Collier and Moreau hadn't just run into a husband who was paying attention. They'd run into a husband who'd been building a case for 3 months. I drove back to Gloria's apartment mid-morning. She opened the door looking like she hadn't slept. The apartment felt different in daylight. Smaller, less aspirational. Collier was there again, but something in his posture had changed. He'd made calls of his own overnight, and whatever he'd learned had cost him some of that smooth confidence. I laid out what Neil had done. The restraining order, the federal contact, the 30% that was still potentially recoverable. Collier stood up from the couch. That filing could accelerate a liquidation event on the platform's end. You may have just made things worse. I looked at him without blinking. I just made it harder for you to disappear with what's left. His jaw tightened. Gloria looked between us and said nothing. I turned back to the documents on the table and pulled out the margin leverage page. You activated a clause that exposes her to losses beyond the original deposit, I said, sliding it toward her. Did you explain this to her before she signed? The risk disclosure was included in, Collier started. Did you explain it to her? I repeated, keeping my eyes on Gloria. A long pause. Then she said quietly, no. He said the returns would offset any volatility. I nodded once and made a note. Every answer was evidence. Every evasion was a data point. That afternoon I got a call I hadn't expected. It was Lexi. She was at her apartment near campus, and her voice had the careful steadiness of someone who'd been rehearsing what they wanted to say. Dad, she began, I need to tell you something I should have told you a long time ago. I sat down. About 8 months ago, Lexi continued, I was home for spring break, and I saw Mom's phone on the kitchen counter. It lit up with a message. I wasn't trying to read it. It was just there. She paused. It was from someone named Trent. It wasn't a work message, Dad. I kept my voice even. What did it say? Enough. Her voice tightened. I convinced myself it wasn't what it looked like. I didn't want to be wrong. I didn't want to blow up the family over something I wasn't sure about. Another pause. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I took a breath. 8 months. She'd been carrying that for 8 months. Lexi, I said carefully, you were protecting your family the way you understood how to. I'm not angry at you. I should have said something. Maybe. But I need you to do something for me now. I kept my tone steady and direct. Write down everything you remember about that message. The date, what it said, exactly what you saw. I need a written account. Can you do that? She said she could. She sounded relieved to finally have something useful to do with what she'd been holding. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and thought about how far the damage had spread. Gloria's choices hadn't just emptied our accounts. They'd put our daughter in the position of carrying a secret that was too heavy for a 21-year-old to hold alone. I called Neil and added Lexi's account to the documentation file. Then I called Garrett. He answered on the first ring, which meant he'd been waiting. I told him everything. Not the edited version, the full picture. Collier, the platform, the federal filing, what Lou had found about Jade Moreau. I told him about the dinner conversations where Gloria had been steering him toward Collier's orbit. The silence that followed was the kind that means someone is recalibrating. She was trying to get me involved, Garrett said finally. Not a question. She was trying to get you close enough for Collier to make his pitch, I replied. I don't think she fully understood what she was setting up. But yes. Another long pause. Then Garrett said, with a quiet fury that reminded me of myself at his age, what do you need me to do? Keep working, I told him. Keep your head down. Don't contact your mother until I tell you it's time. And trust me. Always have, he said. 3 days after Gloria left, I came home from a meeting with Neil to find a notification on my phone. Garrett had tagged me in something on social media. Not directly, but I was mentioned in a comment thread under a post. The post was from a woman I didn't recognize, but the comments were from people I did. And somewhere in the thread, my son's name appeared next to words that made me stop walking and stand still in my driveway. I called Garrett. I saw it, he said immediately. His voice was tight. I didn't post it, Dad. One of Mom's friends must have shared something. My name just got pulled in. I scrolled further. The original post wasn't from Garrett. It was from one of Gloria's friends, a woman named Diane who I'd seen at neighborhood cookouts for 15 years. The post was vague, but pointed. Something about women having the courage to choose themselves and leave behind men who took them for granted. There were enough details in the comments to make clear who it was about. Several people from our neighborhood had liked it. A couple had added their own commentary. I put the phone in my pocket and went inside. I didn't post anything. I didn't call anyone. I went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood at the window for about 2 minutes. Then I called Chuck Waverly. Chuck had been my closest friend since we coached Little League together 12 years ago. He answered with "already saw it," which told me the social media spread was faster than I'd thought. "Don't respond," I told him. "Wasn't planning to." Chuck replied, "You coming over?" "Not tonight. I need you to do something for me instead." I asked Chuck to reach out quietly to a few mutual friends and simply tell them to hold their judgments for now, that the full story would become clear in time. Not a defense, not an attack, just a request for patience. Chuck said he'd handle it. That was the thing about Chuck. He never needed a detailed explanation to know which way to lean. 2 days later, I got a phone call from a woman named Helen Pratt. She lived 2 streets over, and she and her husband had been at our 4th of July cookout last summer. I knew her well enough to wave to, and not much more. "Jerry," she said, getting straight to it, "I want you to know I'm not calling to take sides. But I've been at Gloria's book club for the past year, and I think you should know some things." I sat down and listened. Helen told me that for at least 10 months, the book club meetings had rarely involved books. They'd become planning sessions. Gloria had been open, more open than Helen had expected, about her plan to leave, about the transfers, about Collier. 2 other women in the group had actively helped her think through the logistics, including the timing of the account transfers, to minimize the window for legal intervention. "I didn't say anything sooner because I didn't feel like it was my place," Helen admitted. "But after I saw what Diane posted online, and after some of what I've heard about where that money went," she paused, "I just thought you deserved to know you weren't imagining things." I thanked her, asked if she'd be willing to speak with my attorney. She said she'd think about it. I added her name to the documentation file. The encounter I hadn't planned for came 4 days after Gloria left, on a Wednesday evening in the underground parking garage beneath my storage facility on Route 40. I'd stayed late reviewing freight manifests and was walking to my truck when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around. Trent Collier was standing 15 feet away, hands loose at his sides, dressed like he'd come from a dinner meeting. "I just want to talk," he said. "No attorneys, no recordings. Just 2 men being straight with each other." I stood still and said nothing. But my right hand was already in my jacket pocket, thumb pressing the record button on my phone's voice memo app. "The filing you pushed through is causing problems," Collier continued, moving a few steps closer. "For both of us. The platform has exposure in jurisdictions that don't play well with domestic injunctions. If you pull back, let this unwind quietly. I can have $150,000 back in Gloria's account within 72 hours. He paused, letting that number sit in the air. "Everyone moves on. No federal involvement. No drawn-out court proceedings. Clean." I looked at him for a long moment. He had the practice calm of someone who'd made this kind of offer before and had it accepted. "That's an interesting proposal," I said evenly. "Send it to my attorney in writing." His expression flickered. "I'm asking you to handle this personally. Off the record." "Nothing about this is off the record," I replied. "Not anymore." I turned and walked to my truck. I didn't look back. I heard his footsteps stop, then eventually retreat in the other direction. I sat in the truck for 30 seconds, then sent the audio file to Neil Abrams with a single line of text. He just handed us everything we needed. Neil filed the full divorce petition on a Monday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, we were sitting across a conference table from Gloria's attorney, a sharp woman named Diane Forsyth, who came in with a yellow legal pad and the confident posture of someone who expected to dictate the terms. She didn't waste time. Within 5 minutes, she'd put forward 3 positions. Gloria was entitled to half of both businesses. She was seeking spousal support of $4,200 per month, and she wanted the family home placed in escrow pending final settlement. I sat with my hands flat on the table and let Neil handle the first response. The businesses were restructured into a protected trust prior to any separation filing, Neil said, sliding a document folder across the table. "Mr. Stokes is a salaried employee of a legally independent entity. There is no ownership stake subject to marital division." Forsyth picked up the folder. She read the first 2 pages without expression. Then she set it down and said, with slightly less confidence than she'd had 30 seconds earlier, "We'll be challenging the timing of that restructuring." "You're welcome to," Neil replied pleasantly. "The filing dates are clean and predate any separation activity by 11 weeks. Every step was executed with full legal documentation. The spousal support demand landed harder. Under state law, Gloria had a legitimate claim. She'd been out of the workforce for 7 years managing the household while I built the businesses. Neil had warned me about this. I prepared myself. But sitting there listening to Forsyth lay out the monthly figures still required a particular kind of discipline to absorb without reacting. My client transferred $423,000 from marital accounts without consent, Neil said. We will be presenting the transfer as dissipation of marital assets. That changes the support calculation considerably. Forsyth made a note. The transfers were made from jointly held accounts. My client had equal legal access. Equal access and unilateral concealment are different things, Neil replied, especially when the funds were directed into an unregistered investment vehicle currently under federal review. That last sentence landed like a stone dropping into still water. Forsyth's pen stopped moving. She looked up. Federal review, she repeated. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division opened a formal investigation 4 days ago. Neil confirmed, setting another document on the table. Your client's name appears in the filing as a cooperating party. That status has implications for the support proceeding. The meeting ended 30 minutes later without resolution on any of the 3 points, which was exactly what Neil had wanted. The first court appearance was 2 weeks later. The judge was a woman in her early 60s named Harriet Bowles, and within the first 20 minutes, it was clear she had a particular sympathy for the narrative of a wife reclaiming her independence after a long marriage. She allowed Forsyth extended speaking time twice while Neil was interrupted once. I sat straight and kept my expression neutral. Neil had told me, don't react, don't lean forward, don't give them anything to work with visually. I didn't. But after the session, standing in the hallway, I said to Neil, she's not listening to the financial documentation. She's listening, Neil replied, tucking papers into his briefcase. She's just not ready to rule on it yet. The federal piece changes everything, and Judge Bowles knows it. She won't want her name on a support order for a woman connected to a fraud investigation. He paused. Patience, Jerry. I drove home and called Chuck. We didn't talk about the case. We talked about the upcoming baseball season and a storage contract I was negotiating in Frederick. Normal things. Grounding things. That evening, Garrett came over. He sat at the kitchen table where his mother used to sit and said, I've been thinking about what she was trying to do, setting me up with Collier. I poured 2 glasses of water and sat across from him. And it feels like a betrayal on top of a betrayal, he said quietly. Like I wasn't just a son to her in those moments. I was a tool. I didn't rush to soften that. Because he wasn't wrong, and he was old enough to know it. People make choices when they're trying to protect something, I said finally. Even when those choices hurt the people they love. That doesn't make it right. It just means it's complicated. Garrett nodded slowly. He didn't look convinced. But he looked steadier than he had a week ago. Collier made his second mistake 8 days after the parking garage. The audio recording I'd sent to Neil had already been forwarded to the FBI investigator handling the Meridian Capital case. The offer of $150,000 in exchange for withdrawing a federal complaint qualified, according to Neil's contact at the Bureau, as attempted obstruction. It didn't trigger an immediate arrest, but it moved Collier from a peripheral figure in the investigation to a primary target. What Collier did next surprised even Lou Sizemore. He broke from Jade Morrow. Lou called me on a Thursday morning with the update. Collier had checked out of his downtown hotel 2 nights earlier and relocated to a motel in Virginia, 30 miles south of the city, using a different name on the booking. Morrow was still at her hotel in Silver Spring. They'd stopped communicating through their regular channels. Classic pressure split, Lou explained. When a joint operation starts feeling federal heat, the 2 principals often separate to reduce the legal exposure of being seen together. The problem is it also means they stop coordinating. And when coordination breaks down, mistakes happen. The mistake came 48 hours later. Morrow, apparently acting without Collier's knowledge, attempted to initiate a secondary transfer from the platform's remaining domestic funds to an account in the Cayman Islands. The restraining order blocked it at the processing level. The attempt itself, however, was logged, and it became the second piece of documented evidence the FBI needed to move from investigation to action. Neil called me on a Friday afternoon with a voice that carried the particular satisfaction of someone watching a long chess game approach its conclusion. The Bureau is moving to a warrant, he said. Both of them. Timeline is within the week. I sat in my truck in the parking lot of my Clarksburg facility and let that settle. Gloria called me that evening. Her voice had been stripped of everything except need. Trent hasn't answered his phone in 3 days, she said. I went to the apartment, and the building manager told me he vacated 2 nights ago. No forwarding address. A long pause. Trent said he was moving to better accommodations. He told me everything was being handled. Gloria, I said carefully, you need to understand something. Trent Collier is not relocating. He's running. The silence that followed lasted long enough that I checked the call was still connected. What do I do? She finally whispered. You cooperate fully with the federal investigators when they contact you. I replied. Answer every question honestly. Don't try to minimize your role. And get yourself an attorney who isn't connected to any of this. I paused. Neil can give you a referral if you need one. She started to say something else. I cut in gently but firmly. Gloria, I'll help you navigate this part because it's the right thing to do. But understand that on the other side of this, there's a divorce proceeding that isn't going away. Don't confuse my helping you here for anything more than what it is. A long, quiet exhale. I know, she said. I know what I did. I ended the call and sat in the quiet of my truck for a while. Outside, the storage facility's security lights were just coming on as the sun went down. Rows of orange-lit units stretching into the gathering dark, every one of them built and paid for by years of early mornings and late nights and decisions made with more patience than brilliance. I'd built something real. It was still standing. The week after Collier disappeared, Garrett came to me with his phone in his hand and a look on his face I hadn't seen since he was a teenager who'd made a bad decision and was trying to figure out how to own it. He turned the screen toward me. It was his social media profile. Specifically, a post he'd made 5 days earlier, the one I'd seen in my driveway, where his name had been pulled into the thread under Diane's post about Gloria choosing herself. Garrett hadn't written anything directly, but he'd liked 2 comments that were sympathetic to his mother. In the context of everything that had come out since, those 2 likes felt like a public endorsement of a narrative that was now falling apart. I was wrong, he said simply. I didn't have the full picture, and I acted on half the story. I set the phone down on the table between us. You're 24, I said. You're supposed to want to defend your mother. Not like that. He shook his head. Not publicly. Not before I knew the facts. And not when you were the one who'd actually been. He stopped himself. Pressed his lips together. I'm going to post a correction. Not an attack on Mom. Just a statement that I spoke without knowing everything, and I regret it. I thought about that for a moment. Part of me wanted to tell him to let it go, to not add more fuel to an already public mess. But I looked at my son sitting across from me, taking responsibility without being asked, and I decided not to get in the way of that. Keep it short, I said. No names, no details. Just own your part. He nodded and picked up his phone. Lexi drove up from College Park 2 days later. She sat at the same kitchen table and slid 3 handwritten pages across to me. Her written account of the text message she'd seen on Gloria's phone 8 months earlier. She'd written it out longhand, then typed it and printed it, then written it out again because the first version felt too formal and the second too casual. I wanted it to sound like me, she explained, not like a legal statement. Neil reviewed it and said it was exactly what he needed. The handwritten quality, he noted, was actually more compelling to a judge than polished legal language. I watched my daughter drive away that afternoon from the front porch and thought about the weight she'd been carrying since spring break. 21 years old, and she'd shouldered something that most adults would have put down a lot sooner. That said more about her character than anything I'd taught her directly. The conversation with Garrett and Lexi together happened that Sunday evening, the first time both of them had been in the house since Gloria left. I cooked, which I hadn't done with any real effort in weeks. Nothing elaborate. Steaks on the cast iron, roasted potatoes, the kind of dinner that required attention and produced something worth eating. We talked about everything except the case. Baseball, Lexi's pre-law track, the Clarksburg facility expansion I was planning for spring, Garrett's idea about streamlining the freight routing software. Real things. Future things. At one point Garrett said, looking at his plate, "This house feels different without her." Yes, I agreed. Is that bad? Lexi asked quietly. I thought about it honestly. It's just true, I said. Different doesn't have to mean worse. Neither of them pushed past that. And we finished dinner without anyone needing to say anything more about it. The warrants came on a Wednesday. Neil called me at 8:15 in the morning. I was already at the Clarksburg facility reviewing the expansion plans, and his voice had the careful steadiness of someone delivering news they'd been waiting for. FBI picked up Collier this morning, he said. Dulles Airport. He had a one-way ticket to Lisbon and a carry-on bag with 2 passports, one of them in a different name. Jade Moreau was arrested simultaneously at a hotel in Fairfax County. She'd been there for 4 days under a third identity. I set down the blueprints I'd been holding. Both of them. Both, Neil confirmed. Federal charges. Wire fraud, securities fraud, conspiracy. The U.S. Attorney's Office is pursuing a joint prosecution. Given the documented pattern across 3 victims, including Patricia Garner in Atlanta, the sentencing exposure is significant. We're talking years, not months. I thanked him, hung up, and stood in the open bay of the storage facility for a moment. The corrugated metal walls, the smell of concrete and machine oil, the sound of a forklift working 2 rows over. Everything exactly where it was supposed to be. An hour later, my phone buzzed. Gloria. I picked up. They called me this morning, she said. Her voice was steady but thin. The investigators. They wanted to come in next week. Go, I told her. Tell them everything, exactly as it happened. Don't minimize, don't editorialize. Just facts. I will. A pause. Did you hear about Trent? Yes. Another pause. And the woman he was with? Yes. The silence stretched. Then Gloria said, very quietly, he was with her the whole time, wasn't he? She was real and I wasn't. I didn't answer that directly because the honest answer was yes, and she already knew it. Jerry, she said after a moment, did you organize any of this? The arrest, I mean. I'll let the question sit for a second. I documented what I found and gave it to the right people. I said, the rest was the law doing what it's designed to do. She didn't respond to that. Take care of yourself, Gloria, I said. And I meant it. Not warmly, not coldly, just as a fact. She was the mother of my children. Whatever she'd done, she was still that. The divorce was finalized 9 weeks after the warrants. The spousal support figure was substantially reduced once the court incorporated the dissipation of marital assets into the calculation. The businesses remained untouched. The family home sold 2 months later. We split the equity evenly, which was more than fair given the circumstances, and I didn't fight it. I moved into a townhouse on the east side of Frederick with a 2-car garage I immediately started using as a workspace. The first weekend, I drove down to Baltimore with Chuck Waverly for a Saturday afternoon Orioles game, the first baseball game I'd been to in 4 years. We sat in the upper deck, ate terrible hot dogs, and talked almost entirely about the game. On the way home, Chuck said, "You seem like yourself again." I thought about that. Maybe more than I had been in a while, I admitted. 3 months after the settlement, I got a call from an attorney in Atlanta representing Patricia Garner, the woman Collier had targeted before Gloria. Lou had connected them to Neil weeks earlier. The attorney told me that our documentation, specifically the timeline and the Jade Moreau background research, had been the missing piece in their civil recovery case. A judgment had been entered against both Collier and Moreau. Patricia Garner would recover a substantial portion of what she'd lost. I didn't need recognition for that. The call was enough. Collier and Moreau were convicted on all counts 11 months after their arrest. Collier received 7 years. Moreau received 5. The sentencing judge cited the premeditated, systematic nature of the scheme and the documented harm to 3 separate victims. I was in the courtroom when the verdicts were read. Not out of satisfaction, out of completion. Garrett was with me. He'd asked to come. He sat beside me in the gallery without saying much, and when it was over he stood, straightened his jacket, and said, "Okay, let's go back to work." That was exactly the right thing to say.